people, and welcome to the latest edition of the About That podcast with me, your host, your favorite geek psychologist, your favorite pop culture enthusiast, your favorite queen of the nerds, Dr. Vanessa Hintz. And this episode is the first in a three-part series in which I and one of my dear, super smart friends will discuss the film Soft and Quiet. And so, without further ado, allow us to introduce ourselves and to tee up this very important conversation. Enjoy. Y'all, I am so pleased to be joined today by my dear friend and all-around amazing human being, Dr. Carlton E. Green. Carlton, thank you so much for being with us here today. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
First, let me say thank you to you for having me on for this conversation. I'm really excited about it too. Feeling a little bit nervous, but excited at the same time. I am a licensed psychologist who is doing the work that we are trained to do with regards to providing psychotherapy services to people. Also, so like in the supervision and training space, so providing supervision to junior members of our profession, teaching a few classes here and there. And a lot of my time, though, right now is being spent in the individual consultation space. I shouldn't say individual consultation, in the consultation space. I have relationships with a number of different companies and agencies where we are doing diversity, equity, inclusion work, if not some work just around how it is that people can relate to each other better in the workplaces where they find themselves. I do some facilitation and training when it comes to issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, and/or mental health, or the intersections of those for a number of different locations. And I'm finding myself really doing a lot of coaching work with leaders in some of these spaces who are either wanting to sharpen their skills, or they're actually just trying to work through some really challenging situations in their workplace settings that have some equity or inclusion dynamics at the heart of them, right? So really getting them to figure out how they can show up as more effective leaders who are being really sensitive to the people that they're working with, and really trying to foster a sense of safety in those workplace settings so that they can all work together more effectively. And have the types of outcomes that they want to be having as employees and as employers. So that's a little bit about me. I should say too, like that's where I am right now. Prior to becoming like an independent practitioner and consultant, I was somebody who spent a long time in higher education, right? So I was my first job was as a student affairs professional, and I was at an institution down in Texas for about 10 years doing student affairs work around multicultural issues, community building, student activities, advising student organizations, that type of thing. Went back to grad school, ended up getting master's and PhD into like the counseling psychology area. Also have some training in pastoral counseling and ministry. And then I was a staff psychologist at the University of Maryland Counseling Center for about 5 years. And my last role in higher education was doing diversity training in education at the University of Maryland in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so now here I am in this independent space after transitioning out of institutional work for a long, long time.
Okay, come on with them several flexes, first of all. Second of all, shameless plug. I met Carlton through engaging in these types of spaces. And I cannot thank you enough for how you have influenced me in my career, and undoubtedly how I know you will influence everyone who hears this conversation today. So thank you for everything that you do, everything that you just described. That work, it can be emotionally, physically, spiritually exhausting, and also so rewarding. So thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. And so we are here, my dear friends, to talk about a recent-ish, that was recently released on Netflix. Now, this film is titled Soft and Quiet. Now, let me just say, I learned of this film through one of the many horror fan groups that I'm a part of on social media. Now and again, people will put up posters or put up whatever about new films like, hey, have you watched this? And this one caught my eye because of the subject matter, right? Like people were talking about how it had racist undertones, and I'm like, racist? What now? You said? And so I remember, Carlton, I told you about this film, and you watched it immediately.
Yes.
Immediately. And I told you what it was about, right? So before we get into the conversation, just to share with those of you who may not be familiar. So this film, Soft and Quiet, actually premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival in March of 2022. And then it was released sort of nationally in November of 2022, excuse me. I didn't know nothing about this film until March of this year when it was, I'm sorry, May of this year, excuse me, when it was released on Netflix. And so May 1st, 2023, Soft and Quiet was released on Netflix. And so this is the description of the film according to Netflix. And we're going to break it down just a little bit. Also, just to preface, spoiler alert, we just gonna, I mean, we have to talk about the film, spoilers, whatever. But according to Netflix, Soft and Quiet is, quote, playing out in real time, a school teacher's mixer with like-minded women sparks a volatile chain of events when she encounters a face from her past, end quote. Now, if that is not the underrepresentation of the century, I don't know. So I'm gonna break this down a little bit for you all before we get into talking about reactions about the film. So this mixer that is alluded to in the film's description is actually the inaugural meeting of the Daughters of Aryan Unity group. I'm just saying it again. The Daughters for Aryan Unity.
Which is written on a whiteboard for us to be able to really see and understand
Yes.
what is being conveyed here.
Yes. In a church, no less. And at the outset of this meeting, the main character, Emily, says, quote, "We are here to support each other through this multicultural warfare. I have been brainwashed to feel guilt for the prosperity that white people brought to the Western world." Okay, so nonetheless, the face from her past that Emily, our main character, is confronted with is actually a woman of color who was sexually assaulted, who was raped by Emily's brother. Her brother is currently incarcerated, which we learned through a prison phone call. And Emily and her friends are in a convenience store, and this woman and her sister come in, and this is when, child, all hell breaks loose. Okay, so there's a confrontation that ensues in this store between these white women who just came from this Aryan Unity group and these two women of color. So these white women decide it would be funny for us to break into their house and steal their passports. Why would that be funny? I don't know. But that's what they decided to do. They invade this home. These women of color return home, and all hell breaks loose. So that's all I'm going to say about the film. You know that I don't want to get too much more into it. I would rather us get into this conversation and spread this knowledge about all these things that we witnessed, that you, Carlton, have witnessed twice. I watched this movie once, and once was enough for me. So tell us a little bit about what it was like to watch this film.
Well, I should say, right, I was scrolling back through some of my text messages to sort of like pick up the cadence of how things had unfolded. You sent me a message at 4:05 on a Saturday afternoon about this particular film, right? And I am somebody who I enjoy movies. I like TV, but I don't generally sort of like just pick up something. I have to sort of like find my way into something and sort of like, oh, let me watch this today, type of thing, right? Probably within 15 minutes of you sending me this text message, I was finding this film on Netflix to watch it, right? And I was immediately taken in by the title. And I think I said to you almost immediately, is this film about white women? Without having to know anything else about it. Just the title alone, Soft and Quiet, gave me some clue that this may be about white women. And so I watched it, and I just remember having so many reactions and texting you throughout, right? But initially watching it and feeling the horror of it, watching the everyday dynamics that these women are sort of putting on with each other, or they're sort of engaging in with each other, certainly not being a white woman, not being a white person, and so I'm not always privy to what it's like for white people to be behind closed doors and have their interactions, which is also a really important part of this film, right? It feels like it invites us into this space, especially as people of color, that we don't always have access to. And I could recognize some of these things that these white women were doing from having had interactions with white women. So it's not just that it happens behind closed doors, but we see it all the time as well, or we see it frequently as well. And so I'm watching this movie, right, with this notion of sort of like knowing that people may have described it as a horror film. I think that was a part of the headline that you sent me, and not feeling like it was a horror film for much of it, feeling like it was just actually it was telling a story about racism, which is about it. There are ways that we can think about it as being horror, right? I actually talk about racial terrorism sometimes, and so that was definitely showing up in the film. And then when we get to the place where you're talking about sort of like all hell breaking loose in the film, then I was just sort of like, oh, yeah, this feels like it's going into a space of horror that I really am uncomfortable watching, feeling some kind of way about watching. Don't actually like how it took a turn from talking about this everydayness of white women and how they operate into sort of like these manifestations of physical violence, because we don't always see white women in that way. And so it almost felt like this was upending the premise of the movie, if you will, because you get a real, to me, you get a real depiction about what it could be like to be engaged in sort of like what I sometimes call white lady terrorism, right? But then like the violence kind of throws us off track a little bit. Watching it though, I was uncomfortable. I was a little bit anxious, anticipating things that might come, and also recognizing again, oh, this is actually kind of familiar to me, right, in different spaces. So it was a huge emotional experience to watch, and then of course I watched it again in preparation for our conversation. And it was a little bit different the second time, but it was still so like that unnerving feeling, that feeling of uncertainty
Yes.
about, right, sort of like what will come of these actions and attitudes and language talk amongst these white women, right? So it creates this sense of uncertainty. It created a sense of uncertainty for me, even though I had seen it already, right?
Yes.
What about you? What about you? What was it like when you watched it?
Child, you remember I said I wasn't gonna watch it. Remember when I sent it to you, and then I said we should have a conversation about this, but I'm not gonna watch it. And I remember the reason that I didn't want to watch it is because I feel like I live around soft and quiet women. The space that I live in, that I operate in day to day, is a predominantly white western suburb of Milwaukee. And I feel like those women could live next door to me. And the
Mm,
fact that that is a possibility is frightening to me, right? As
yes.
I think about being a black woman in an interracial marriage in this type of space, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to consume that, right? Because I already have fears and concerns when I, move around day to day. So you remember, I was like, nope, not
You
gonna
were.
watch. I
You
remember you urged me, like you should really watch it. And I was like, all right, it's 90 minutes, I can do it. I will also say that I did a lot of research before I watched it because one, I wanted to understand more about the director and the writer because
mm,
if this was I would have felt differently if a white person made this film. And that's not
mm,
a shame. That's not it wouldn't have been good. It just would have been a different type of context. And so to give you all context, if you're not aware, the director and writer of this film, Beth De Arujo, I think is how you say her last name. She is Chinese American. She's of Chinese American and Brazilian descent. And she says that her motivation for this film came after what happened in May 2020 with Amy Cooper,
mhm.
the white woman who called the police on Christian Cooper, who was a black man watching birds in Central Park, I believe. And she called the police, and I'm sure we all remember that video. But Beth, she said the inspiration came from my greatest fears and my nightmares, especially as Asian American hate crimes increased over 2020. And for me, I still remember what 2020 was like, being a Black counselor, being
Yeah.
a Black therapist, counseling Black people, and not knowing how to provide any sort of comfort or solace
Hmm.
around racism. And
Yeah.
so for me, this movie was a reminder of that, that
Yeah.
this is something that people of color have to deal with. And there's literally no escape. And sometimes it is so insidious, it is soft, it is quiet, and you don't even know until you come home and there's a group of white women in your home. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, watching it, I remember I was texting you like stream of consciousness as I was watching it because I was like, this is some crazy shit. You know what I'm saying? Like it was,
It is.
and it was not surprising. The things that they were saying
Mm-mm.
as a DEI professional, as a person in America, these are things that I've heard on more than one occasion. There's nothing left for me in this world as a white person. People of color and anybody else with a marginalized identity, they get all the things. There's nothing left for me.
Yeah.
How many times have we heard that, right? Like, how many times have we heard that? So I will say that, and again, I won't give it away too much, but to me, the choice to end the movie with hope as opposed to despair and like, oh, here we go again, white people, like I appreciated that.
Mm.
I stand by
Mm.
the fact that I would never watch this movie again. I just don't want to do that. Like
Right. You
so
know what?
I just don't.
To, to add to that, right? So when you sent it to me, I actually shared it with a few people and said, folks should consider watching this. And I was even having a conversation with somebody really recently about the film. And what I always say is that I'm not recommending that you watch this film, right? Because it is unnerving. Whether or not you are a person of color or a white person, right? I'm very sensitive to the fact that this movie is unnerving.
Yes.
And I think that there is something that can be gained from watching the movie as well. And I would say that probably more often than not, for white folks,
Yes.
right? I do think that white people will find it hard to watch. As I've listened to different podcasts about it and, to prepare for our conversation, what I've heard mostly is white people finding it hard to watch, but maybe also missing the point,
Yes.
right? This movie is about how it is that racism among white women, who are often considered to be dainty and nonviolent and passive, without voice, it is firmly about how it is that they participate in and propagate racial terrorism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And on some level, we get some glimpses of sort of like the psychological violence that they participate in, right, which many will not own up to, and how that could, but not always, lead to physical violence that they participate in, right? Um, and even to the point of sort of like the author using or being catalyzed by the Amy Cooper incident, right? So Amy Cooper is really playing out this psychological terrorism with this Black man of like she's going to call the police on him, right? And then says things about how it is that he was threatening her, if I recall correctly, right? So for a white woman to say that a Black man is threatening her and to call the police, I mean, we're talking about Jim Crow, we're talking about lynchings, right? We're talking about the racialized history of America that this woman is invoking, almost in some ways as though there is a class that white women go to and they learn how to do this thing, right? But clearly there's no class that they go to learn how to do this. But it has not across the years not permitted them to keep enacting that same trope, like that same type of racial terrorism, right? And so I think that is what people are missing in the movie. This is a movie about how white women participate in and perpetuate white racial terrorism.
Yes. And I appreciate the point you're making about people maybe not grasping that point of the film. And I'll just share with you, the horror movie groups that I'm in, right? That where I learned about this film, it's mostly made up of white people. And I have found that the reactions to this film have been very polarizing. So I think that on one end of the spectrum, there are people who kind of like you said, right? There's something to be gained from this. It was very difficult for me to watch. I can't believe there are people like this in America. Well done. The other end of that spectrum, this is not a horror film. This is political BS. This is stupid and overly dramatic. Why would someone make this? A waste of my life, a waste of 90 minutes that I'll never get back, right? And for me, I think that, and you and I talked about this, and you sort of alluded to it a few minutes ago. Part of what I felt like was maybe, I don't want to call it a miss, but for me, the moment that, spoiler alert, they were in this church meeting and this woman took this aluminum foil off this pie and there was a swastika in the top of the pie. From that moment, any semblance of sameness that I think white people may have felt, any semblance of connection that they felt with these characters was gone, because people are maybe not going to admit, or not, like Nazism is no, that's a hard no. You know what I'm saying? And so I feel like the association of their ideas and their ideology. So there were two associations that they made with Nazism and with the KKK. And I think that those are two things that the average movie watcher are going to, again, hard stop. So immediately when those things became part of the story, part of the conversation, when we saw on the whiteboard Daughters of Aryan Unity, people were like, oh, I'm not that type of white person. That's not me. And so again, I think that the lessons that maybe could have been taken around the subtle, as you have called it, everydayness of racism were over dramatized to the point that people are separate from it. It's kind of like, said another way, when we watch superhero movies, right? Like there's a certain level that I can connect with these heroes, but when they start flying and throwing cars, it's like, oh, well, that's gone for me. Like, nope, I don't do that, right? And I think that with this, with content that was already uncomfortable, that pushed it to the point where people could further themselves without feeling bad. Like I can further myself from these women and what they're saying, even though, as we discussed, the things that they were saying as they were going around their little circle are things that we have heard in the spaces in which we work and the spaces in which we operate. You know what I'm saying?
Not even the spaces where we operate, but what the rhetoric that these women are participating in is also the rhetoric that we're hearing come across the airwaves these days, right? It's in the newspapers. When we are in classrooms, there are students who are saying things like, there's no space for us as white people, right? Or people of color are getting all of the benefits, right? If I say that something, if somebody says something about white people being racist, that's just acceptable. But let me say something about Black people being racist, or women being sexist, or something like that, then everybody piles on me. Like, this is a part of the conversation that they're having that is just so, in some ways, again, it gives us access to these white conversations amongst white people that we don't always see. And I think that a part of what we, I often say this to folks, right? When I'm training people and I'm saying to them, especially white folks or men folks, right? Or so like able-bodied folks or heterosexual people who are needing to actually deal with how they participate in harming other people, right? Or being terrorists to other people around identity-related issues, is that you have to actually, if you want to continue to do the work as a white person, we'll use white people, right? As a white person, you need to be with other racially conscious white people to help you continue to grow in doing the work, right? And I always have to say to people, and this is the movie is a really good example of this. Now, let's be clear. Putting a group of white people together to talk about race-related issues can actually be pretty scary for us as people of color.
Yes.
Because when y'all go behind closed doors and you have conversations about race, it's quite possible that this could devolve into something that does not feel safe for us and that could actually manifest some danger for us. So I recognize me telling you that you need to be with other white people to talk about this in racially conscious ways could also be fraught, right?
Yes.
because white folks are often saying like, well, we don't know how to talk about race, or we don't really know how to delve into this. And there could be a way that that could be true because of the way that you've been socialized to think and talk about race as white people, right? Or people who have been racialized white. And so we get to see how something could really, really devolve into
Yes.
something that feels like a hotbed of danger for
Yes.
people. And I should say a hotbed of danger for white folks as well.
Yes.
These women are not necessarily mentally ill, but they are not taking care of each other. They
Mm-hmm.
are not caring for themselves. They are not looking out for each other's best interests. It's almost like they keep feeding the worst of themselves in this to the degree that we see them manifest this violence, right? There is nobody, well, amongst them, there's really nobody in the group who's saying like, y'all, let's take a beat. What are we actually doing here, right? They just keep going to the most undesirable parts of themselves, right? To the
Mm-hmm.
parts that are probably there for many white folks, right? And to your point, this is why it's hard for people to watch.
Yes.
Nobody
Yes.
really wants to connect with that utterly other part of themselves. That's language that I would be stealing from. I'm gonna remember her name later. It's a Black woman psychologist who writes in the area of relational cultural theory, right? And she has a new book that came out of talking about race-related issues, and she talks about how within all of us there is this part that is the utter other that I could just never have any capacity to be able to name or touch or go near. And so white folks watching this film who immediately, like you said, pick up on that swastika on that cherry pie, that gives them an out, right? But here's what I would, even as you were talking about, Vanessa, this came to me and I was thinking like, oh, I wonder if a part of what we are supposed to be picking up or a part of the symbolism is, and this may be hard for people to hear, or maybe this is a stretch, just how this dangerous whiteness is baked in to society,
Yes. Yes.
right? I mean, you get this real this repulsive image of this swastika on this cherry pie, like this very American thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that there is something that the author may be trying to communicate to us about just how endemic, just how baked in
Yes.
these types of white supremacist ideas, or these white terrorizing ideas, are baked into American culture.
Yes, and that is actually a tremendous segue into this quote that I found from the author, and it's a bit long, but I'll read it verbatim because I think it's actually so germane to what we're talking about right now. And this was in a March 2022 interview that she did with Filmmaker magazine, and she said, and I quote, "The legacy of white women wielding their power over people of color made me want to focus on the deep-rooted legacy of white supremacy and the legacy of the Confederacy in this country. I read anything I could find on alt-right women and Ku Klux Klan women's groups. I discovered that there has been a deliberate rebranding of the alt-right women to have the veneer of smart, sophisticated Instagram influencers so that they can reach the mainstream more effectively. The KKK women used to publish a magazine called Homefront, which was branded as a home ec magazine, but actually pushed their white supremacist agenda. So that became the focus of this film. And as you were talking, I was thinking about right because part of what I when I watched the first the church scene, right, where they're in the meeting and they're just feeding off of one another, right, and then we see that more dramatically and overtly when the violence ensues in the home invasion. I think I was thinking about how in another instance, in a less violent instance, think about instances you've been in where somebody's made a joke that was probably offensive, probably racist, and everybody's laughing and you just laugh too, just because everybody's laughing. Because you don't want to be the person that's not laughing, or you're at a function and someone says something that might be racist or might be sexist or might be homophobic, but you don't want to be, quote, that person that causes a scene, so you just go along with it. And I feel like that is what that film was depicting, just in an overly dramatized way. And again, I think that that is where there are lessons to be learned about that, the danger of allowing the treading softly and quietly, right? we become cognizant, if we become aware that this is happening, what is our duty given our, I don't want to say duty. What is our responsibility? I don't know what a different word is, but what do we need to do to not contribute to this? And I would say, and this is something that we talk about, in the work that we do in the spaces that we operate, if you have privilege, if you have power, your responsibility is different than somebody who doesn't. And I think that that's another thing that is difficult for people with power to really reconcile is, again, I'm not like them white women, so I'm not part of the problem. We talked about this, right? Take the pastor of the church. What did he do when he found out what they were doing? I'm not going to report you, but you need to get out.
And you need to go now.
You need to get out.
It is a complete abdication of responsibility. I mean, and think about what you're saying too, like this church space, this space that is supposed to be about healing for people, that's supposed to be about salvation, that's supposed to be about morality, that's supposed to be about leading the way, right? All these things, but let's be clear, right? The church is also undergirded by whiteness. Mm-hmm. And whiteness is a real strong force in the country. And to your point, if people are not recognizing how strong of a force whiteness is, they'll just get caught up with it and go with it rather than figuring out how to resist it. But the fact of the matter is, right, we saw moments of when it like shades or glimpses in the film of when somebody felt like maybe they could resist, but then they would just get caught right back up in it, right? Especially around like the when we see more of the violent parts of the film. But even, I guess, maybe even some of the earlier conversations, right? This veneer of whiteness that people might try to resist, like when one of the women says, like, "Oh, nobody's going to post anything about this," right? Which is giving us a sense of, oh, something is happening here that should not be happening, that you don't want other people to know about. And then whiteness swoops in to say things like, and this was deep to me, even when people were trying to resist, there are ways that whiteness would come into the conversation and either shut that down or challenge, so like the resistance. Like at one point, I think it was when they were asking about the recording, right? Mm-hmm. And whether or not somebody was going to record this or post this or share this outside of this space or whatever. And Emily, the main character, comes in and says, "The Constitution protects you."
It's not
right, which is deep, right, in the context of this conversation. But let's be clear: the Constitution was written to actually protect white male landowning people, right?
The Constitution that called Black people 3/5 of a person. Is that the same Constitution we're talking about? Okay, just check.
Right. Which doesn't even really regard indigenous people, right, in the context of So there's a way that this woman, whenever people try to resist, invoke whiteness, and then people just fall right back in line with whiteness, right? Nobody actually, to your point, right, and to do the work of DEI, you've got to really be figuring out or situating yourself to determine what's my relationship to whiteness and how much of that am I willing to push back on. Now, I was in a training a few months ago where I was doing some work with a professional organization, and it was deep because as we were talking about how it is that some of the white folks were concerned about how it is that they would be experienced with regards to pushing back on whiteness, one of the Black people in the space, a Black psychologist, said something to the degree of, "This is making more sense to me now," or maybe he didn't say it that way. What he put on the table was, nobody wants to be Black because y'all know how Black people get treated. And Black people are the ones who are generally doing a lot of this resistance work, right? And so if you are going to participate in pushing back on or trying to dismantle or undo or unlearn whiteness, it actually requires you to begin to think about how you are aligning yourself with Blackness. Mm-hmm. And let's be clear, y'all know y'all don't want that.
Wasn't there like a talk show in the early 90s where I feel like this was I don't remember, it was Phil Donahue, it was one of them shows, I don't remember, but I feel like no, it was a woman, but I feel like the hosts asked people to stand up if they would want to be Black in America, and nobody stood up. I feel like this was a real thing that happened on early 90s TV. Like, I swear this is a thing that
So,
happened.
yeah,
And
I think you might be referring to an episode of Oprah. Oprah did this, I think.
maybe it was Oprah. Okay. Was it in
I
the early? I feel like she had that early 90s like hair
think.
situation. So,
Yes.
yes, I feel like this is a thing to me, is what makes this a horror film, is
Mhm.
that we know this is our everyday. This is our way of being in America. So, what are we supposed to do about it as people of color, as other or marginalized people who are oppressed by the structures of power? That to me in itself is why this is scary. It is why I elected to bury my head in the sand. I don't want to watch that. I don't want to be reminded of that. Give me this 90 minutes to not think about that, right? Like to not have to think about what is happening all the time, every day around me. And I think that it's, again, it is daunting. And I think it's also what allows for people to so readily be like, that was stupid. That
Mhm.
movie was stupid. That doesn't
Mhm.
have anything to do with me. That was political, right? Like it makes that inability to confront those things, to confront the proximity to whiteness, to confront the however you feel about blackness, about other, all of those things, right? Like it, uh, thinking
Right.
about it now, like my chest hurts a little bit because I remember what it was like to watch that film. And I remember what it was like to look at my white ass husband when he came home after I watched that film, right? Like, uh,
Now, you might you can edit.
Ooh, it was getting good. And just as it was getting good, that concludes part one of the 3-part series in which I and Dr. Carlton Green discuss Soft and Quiet. Did you love that? Do you want to hear more? If the answer is absolutely yes, be sure to join us again for parts 2 and 3 of this very riveting, very deep, very important discussion. Until then, I wish you and your families safety, health, and joy. Until next time, beautiful people.